Oh, there he is. Jeff? Is everybody here?
Yeah, sorry, I can't seem to unmute myself on the other side.
Okay, so have you admitted everybody who's in the waiting room?
Yep, everybody's in.
Okay, so then we'll start. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for being here. My name is Merle Schell. I'm one of the co-chairs of SEPAC, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event that we're really very excited about. I also want to introduce Jeff Levin, who's also a member of the SEPAC board, and he's hosting us this evening. So thank you so much, Jeff. And let me give you a little bit of background before I turn this over to our panel. A few months ago, our committee, and along with Eric Oxford, who's our student services director, our co-partner in this event, and Megan Taylor, who's our school committee liaison, we all were discussing, what we might want to do for upcoming events this year. And one of the things that occurred to us is very important would be to revisit the impact of social emotional learning and relationships on kids, especially in these times. And I reached out to Jamie Slavic because I knew him and asked him if he'd be willing to put together an event. And of course he said yes, because he's a nice guy. And he suggested that we do it as a panel, which is phenomenal. So then Jamie really reached out to some of his colleagues. We have a lot of expert clinicians throughout the school district here. And he asked some of them to join this effort. And they're here tonight. You probably have met or know some of them. One of them is Amanda Lockerbie, who works at Glover, Gina Hart, who works along with Jamie at Marblehead High School, and Alex Rosenstein, who has left us his slides but is not here tonight. But Jamie will give you an update on that and some happy news to share. So we're very excited to get going. And I really think that the only thing else that I can tell you before I turn it over to the panel is that we're recording this session. We'll stop the recording at the end of the presentation and before the Q&A for matters of privacy and to protect, the security and privacy of your children. And then we're going to open it up to the floor. It'll be offline, so you can just, at that point in time, I think Jeff will correct me if I'm wrong, unmute yourselves to ask your questions. So that's it. I can't wait for the panel to show us their presentation. And Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Schell, and on behalf of the speakers tonight, thank you to SEPAC and Dr. Oxford for having us. We're honored to speak with you about building relationships with students in the school context. So it's myself, Amanda Lockerbie, Gina Hart, and Alex Rosenstein, who can't be here tonight because he had a new baby. So congrats to Alex. And I also want to acknowledge Jillian Bradbury, who put a teacher's touch on our presentation, both in the content and the slides. So Jeff, next slide, please. So we're going to talk about developing relationships with students in the school context. First, Amanda is going to talk about why we should focus on relationships, why it's important, and what the research tells us. Gina and I are going to talk about how we create relationships, both relationship skills and what the research says in terms of developing relationships with students in the classroom and how we do that and what the outcomes can be. Next, Gina is going to talk about the growth mindset. If there's one theory that we want you to understand, one theory that we believe can help us develop relationships with students, it's the growth mindset. So Gina's going to briefly introduce it, and then we're going to play part of a TED Talk from Carol Dweck, who's the creator of Growth Mindset. Next, we're going to talk about the keys to developing relationships with students of different ages, so early learners, preteens, and teenagers. And then we're going to talk about what you can do as parents to help us develop relationships with students. Finally, we're gonna touch on the impact of the context that we're all living in, the COVID-19 pandemic, and how that impacts our developing relationships with students. Then Dr. Oxford is going to say a few words, and Dr. Schell is going to lead us in a Q&A. Next slide, please, Jeff.
So why are we focusing on relationships? Young children experience their world as an environment of relationships, and these relationships affect virtually all aspects of their development: intellectual, social, emotional, physical, behavioral, and moral development. Healthy development depends on the quality and reliability of a young child's relationship with important people in his or her life, both within and outside the family. Even the development of a child's brain architect depends on the establishment of these relationships. How connected students perceive themselves to be to adults and peers at school can make all the difference in terms of their ability to succeed. School connectedness, as defined by the CDC, is a belief students have that adults and peers care about who they are as individuals, as well as who they are as learners. School connectedness research has shown us that it's been linked to increased academic achievement, increased self-concept and self-confidence, help develop self-regulation skills, improves the overall behavioral profile of a school, results in mental wellness, and also a good perception of the general school climate. The importance of positive school climates, particularly from the perspective of school connectedness, cannot be overlooked or underestimated. It's all about relationships. Nothing else matters if we don't connect with the people that we serve in schools.
Next slide, please, Jeff.
Okay, hello everybody. So next we're going to talk about relationships and how it fits into social emotional learning, which is a district-wide goal that we've been working on. So we refer to this a lot of times as SEL, and we're working on this, with our staff, with our students. We have a lot that we're doing in the high school right now. So social emotional learning, an overview of that is we as adults acquiring these skills and then modeling and teaching them to our students. So it's the acquisition and application of knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions effectively, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. So the goal being that we as a school community help develop these skills through our students by the time they graduate and they can go into their adult lives functioning in a healthy way. We pull a lot of our SEL information from the CASEL framework. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They have a lot of great information and guidelines. So relationship skills is one of the major components of SEL. If you look at the wheel here, social emotional learning is in the middle, and then we have the major components. And then the circles in blue are the avenues through which we try to achieve social emotional learning through our communities. So as discussed, we're going to focus on relationship skills tonight. So in particular, the abilities to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships and to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. This includes the capacities to communicate clearly, listen actively, be cooperative, work collaboratively to problem solve and negotiate conflict constructively. This is something that's major, especially in the teenage years. A lot of times conflict and criticism can affect people's how they feel about themselves and their self-awareness, and this can cause anxiety. And what we're really trying to do with this is build distress tolerance skills to deal with some uncomfortable potential conflict, in the idea that it can create opportunities for growth if we learn how to have these conversations and accept that there are things that we need to work on and be able to share that with others. Navigating settings with differing social and cultural demands and opportunities, and provide leadership and seek or offer help when needed.
Thanks, Gina. Next slide, please. So next I'm going to talk about the evidence-based strategies for building relationships in the classroom. This slide comes from some professional development we've been doing with teachers at Marblehead High School. And the strategies and outcomes I'm going to talk about come from this podcast here from NPR Hidden Brain, talking about how relationships can transform GPAs in the classroom. So all of this material will be available on SEPAC's website. So I encourage you to listen to that when you can. And then These first 5 strategies I'm going to talk about are from the Search Institute, and they put out a really great document about how to do these things during COVID. So first, we want to express care. We want to show students that we care about them, that we're interested in them as people. We want to challenge their growth, let them know that we believe that they're not a finished product and that we're going to help get them to a different place than they are now, wherever that is. And then we want to provide support. We want to help them feel like we're in this with them and reaching their goals. So whatever their goals are, those are our goals as well. Then we want to share power. We're going to talk about this later on as well when we talk about preteens and teenagers, but we have to ask kids what they need from us, how they're experiencing our classroom, and teaching them to be aware of their feelings and be willing to be flexible around kind of the power structure in the classroom. And then we want to expand their possibilities. We want to talk to them about life outside of Marblehead, about life outside of Marblehead Public Schools and all of the possibilities that exist in the world so that we can link their goals to other possibilities that are out there. The next important strategy for building a relationship, especially a connection when there isn't one, is to find commonalities, interests, values that are shared between educators and students. This can be especially powerful for teachers. Teachers may come into a classroom and feel like they don't have a lot in common with students, but when you're able to find that you like similar activities, you have similar values, students do better in those circumstances. Another really important research-based way for developing relationships in the classroom is connecting educators and parents with positive messages. So the research says that any communication improves classroom performance, but positive communication, Johnny did a great job contributing to class. It's wonderful to have him. He's doing such a great job reading. Those are good. And what's even better than that is positive messages and constructive messages. So Johnny's doing great. And I'd love for you to read with him for 20 minutes each night. It would really help our work together in the classroom. Next is expectations of success and high expectations for all students. I think teachers and all staff members can experience students who are struggling, who are having a hard time meeting the expectations of their classroom, of engaging with their lessons, and having high expectations for those students is really important in developing relationships. And then recognizing our implicit bias. Who are the students that are hardest for us to connect to? And to make sure that we do these things, especially for those students. And when we do all of those things, what the research says is that relationships are central. They're not secondary to achievement or grades, but they're a driver for achievement or grades. They become a really important factor in students' achievement overall. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about
We
the
just
growth
had
mindset,
the
which
most
is
amazing family vacation.
Let's go! Oh my God!
This is gorgeous.
So we're going to talk about the growth mindset, which is a really valuable perspective to be able to take. I know when I learned about it, it kind of informed the way I talk to students a little bit differently. So the growth mindset is the idea that intelligence and talent are not inherent. They're skills that can be acquired through hard work, where versus a fixed mindset. The fixed mindset, success and failure are very black and white, and failure is something to be afraid of, and it's the end of the road. Where a growth mindset, there's a learning opportunity when someone doesn't meet the typical expectations for success. And growth mindset keeps the value on learning through those challenges and struggles, which leads to larger growth. So it's a different way of looking at success and failure. And you can't grow if you didn't have to struggle to learn something. So considering that and how we work with our students and as adults as well. So we're going to show you a video that gets into more detail about the growth mindset.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge, or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it. How are we raising our children? Are we raising them for now instead of yet? Are we raising kids who are obsessed with getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A or the next test score? And are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award. So, what can we do? How can we build that bridge to yet? Here are some things we can do. First of all, we can praise wisely, not praising intelligence or talent. That has failed. Don't do that anymore, but praising the process that kids engage in. Their effort, their strategies, their focus, their perseverance, their improvement. This process praise creates kids who are hardy and resilient. There are
Thanks, Jeff. Next slide, please.
So next I'm going to kind of go into developmental stages with young learners. So schools are often the first setting in which a child is expected to establish a relationship with people outside their own family. In addition to their classroom teacher, in schools and communities, children also encounter peers, staff, after-school program leaders, community leaders, tutors, coaches, etc. But at the early elementary level, the role of the classroom teacher is critical because they are with this person the majority of the school day, and it really sets the tone for their school experience. Schools can make or break kids. They can be their safe havens, or they can be places they try and avoid. Establishing rapport is at the center of everything we should be doing at this level. Ways we do this include establishing classroom routines and structures, establishing classroom communities, starting each morning off in a positive manner. So what does that look like? Perhaps it's a morning greeting routine that the teachers and students go through, or the teacher greets the student individually by their name at the door when they enter their classroom or when they enter the Zoom. Small talking with students, quick individual check-ins, anything to help set a positive tone to the school day and help students leave their invisible backpacks at their locker or their door. We also use social emotional curriculum to help explicitly teach and build skills that we want students to know. Modeling respectful and responsive relationships, not just with students, but the teachers also model how they interact with other staff members and other teachers. Children are always watching us. Connect with students by getting to know them as individuals, find out their likes, their interests, their dislikes. Do they have pets, family? So it's very important, especially given our emphasis on having a growth mindset, that teachers need to model unconditional positive regard and reliability for our young learners, because we're all at school to learn. We're all going to make mistakes, but we need to focus on the process and growing. We need to be modeling kindness, social skills, self-regulation skills, resiliency. Sometimes just simply listening to a child and what they have to say and how they feel, and then just validate them as individuals goes a long way to building a connection. Growth promoting relationships are based on the continuous give and take between a child and an adult. They're not one directional. Relationships are reciprocal. And also, let's not forget about play, especially with young learners. Play is essential to the development of children and youth because it contributes to their cognitive, physical, social, and emotional well-being. And it's not just play between peers. We should engage in play with our children and students. An important thing to remember, even if it's not the classroom teacher, it could be another adult in the building. Resiliency literature consistently demonstrates that all it takes for a child to weather tough personal circumstances is the presence of one important adult in his or her life. And I think if we all reflect on our school experiences or our lives, hopefully we have an adult that we can easily identify that really made an impact on us as humans.
Thank you, Amanda. Next slide, please, Jeff. I'm going to talk about developing relationships with preteen students. This was Dr. Alex's slide. So for preteens, you have to get into their world. You have to let them share what they're interested in and be a part of that, whether or not it's something that's interesting to you. And that shows that you value them. Do things together. I filled in for Dr. Alex when he had his first child at Village School maybe 5 years ago. And I don't think I did one session in his office. I don't even think I ever went into his office. I just played games with kids, did activities in the classroom, took a walk, ate lunch. And then use your relationship with the preteen as a jumping off point. Model the skills that they'll need to develop relationships with others. Help them feel safe in the relationship with you so that they can expand their network. And then you have to give preteens a voice, some degree of control in the situation, picking when you meet, what you do, how you start the conversation. Those are all ways to be better at developing relationships with preteens. Next slide, please.
Okay, developing relationships with teenagers. So one of the biggest things, especially with teenagers at this developmental stage, is relatability. If they don't feel like they can relate to you, they're not going to sit with you and take time out of their day to talk to you about what they might be struggling with or what they might need help with. Dr. Slavitt and Amanda both touched on this, but whatever I can do, especially in my first session with them, just making some sort of connection, whether it's they have a pet, I'm going to show them a picture of my dog, or if they like hockey, I'm going to tell them about how I went to the Stanley Cup a few years ago. I show every kid a picture of my son. I do everything I can to show them that I'm human and that they can, relate to me in some way. Visibility and accessibility, especially in a high school, is really important. It's bigger. It's considered, a really big community. So there's a lot of things you can do to kind of show yourself to be visible and approachable. I'm out there in the mornings saying hi to kids as they come in, lunch duty, talking to kids as they walk by, making appointments with them, going into their health class and talking to them about substance use. I make myself available to the teachers so that they can refer students to me if they have concerns. The more visible and accessible you are, the more approachable you are. Understanding the developmental stage is really important. So this is a stage where teenagers want to be a little bit more independent from their parents. And this can be difficult sometimes because it might be a break from what they were doing a year or two ago. But it is really important for them to be able to feel independence. Sometimes if they have too much control on their lives, it's gonna lend itself to stress and potential mental health issues. So obviously there needs to be some supervision, but if they can feel independence and control over their lives, they're gonna function in a much healthier way. This is also the developmental stage where they're developing their identity. They're really thinking about what their future is gonna be as an adult, what their next steps are. They're thinking about who they are and what they wanna value. And this can also, again, lend itself to some confusion around this topic, and which can be very emotional. It's often a very emotional stage of many people's lives. Considering the social context at this stage is very important. It's again, a stage in their lives where they're really considering their peer group to be very important. They're very, very socially aware of how other people in their peer group see them, how the larger student population sees them. Social media and communication is huge at this stage. I can't stress enough that this is how our teenagers communicate with each other. And it's not only like something they've been doing for the last few years, they grew up through each developmental stage, oftentimes learning how to communicate with each other like this. So Snapchat and Instagram and not even texting is not even, that's a more personal thing that they do. If they have each other's phone number, that means that they're actually really friends. So if I didn't know what it meant to be left unread on Snapchat, or left, what it means to be left unopened or to lose a streak, I wouldn't be meeting them where they're at and understanding why that matters to them. So I've had to learn a lot about social media over the last few years, and meeting them where they're at in that context is really important. Romantic relationships is a big thing that comes up at this stage. And that's one of the things that I try to make students feel really comfortable talking to me about, because it often can be something that's affecting their emotions, in a significant way. Substance use is a very common thing that's behaviors, and we want to be really careful about how we are assessing students, but it's really important to consider that a lot of students are exploring substance use and socially drinking and socially using marijuana. And it's really important for students to feel comfortable talking to me about that. If I don't allow them to trust me to talk to me about that, I would never be able to assess or intervene if things do get to a point where there's a risk or safety behavior. So just going to give you some statistics about how common it is. The National Institute on Drug Abuse does a longitudinal study each year, and they track students each year of their high school. So 2020 12th graders in the United States, 62% of them endorse using alcohol, 47% vaping, nicotine or marijuana, and 43% marijuana. So on average, that's about half of our potential student body endorsing ever having used substances. So my point in sharing this is to say that to expect them to never use and to approach them in a way that says that's not okay, and if you tell me about that, I'm going to call your parent every time. again, they're never going to feel comfortable enough telling me about what they did on their weekends and letting me in enough to intervene if there is a safety risk. Luckily, the statistics on more higher risk for overdose substances like opiates and benzodiazepines and stimulants, those statistics are much lower, like 3 or 4%. And we know in Marblehead, especially for opiates, the overdose rates are much lower than they are in surrounding towns like Salem, Lynn, Lowell. However, it's still important that we have to consider that this is happening here and we need to pay attention to that. So the other thing we try to do with substance use is prevention and education awareness around this throughout the district. So we've done a lot of different parent education events. I'm in the health classes talking to them about substance use speakers, assemblies. So this is another way that we're trying to just address this common issue in the teenage years. If anybody has questions about some of the programming we've done, feel free to ask in the Q&A. And lastly, confidentiality is really important at this stage, a little bit different than when the kids are younger. These students, a lot of times, even as seniors, are adults, 18. And again, fidelity is very important to them at this developmental stage. They need to be able to trust us. And there's a lot of things that we aren't able to share back with parents or teachers. And we take it a little bit, more seriously at this age because building that therapeutic relationship confidentiality is key.
Thanks, Gina. So next I'm going to talk about the effect of parent messaging on our development of relationships with students as school professionals. So school's challenging for everyone. Everyone has, can think back to that one grade or one time when school was really hard. And it's easy to send negative messages around that, both implicitly and explicitly. So your statements to your child about school, how you talk about school, that leads to child's beliefs about school and has a direct impact on our relationships with them. Positive parent statements about school are critical. I recommend doing this on a daily basis, if not more. One thing that you can do is express confidence. Express confidence in the teacher who's teaching your child, on the clinician who's working with your child, on the school administration. Hearing that from a parent can be really powerful in helping students feel safe in forming relationships. Praise the struggle. It's something we've been talking about all night. School's hard. There's going to be hard days, and that's an opportunity for you to say, you're doing a really good job working through a really hard time in school, and I'm very proud of you. Give the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we've all had our kids come home and say, I had this interaction with an adult, and you become concerned about it. But try to take the other perspective. Try to take the teacher's perspective. Try to not just jump into the distress that your child is experiencing. And then finally, prioritize readiness for learning. That really helps with relationships. Make sure your child's getting a good night's sleep. Make sure they have something to eat in the morning. Those health behaviors really have a huge impact on learning. Next slide, please, Jeff. So finally, we want to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on our relationships with students. All of our relationships happen within context, and the context that we're in right now is a really difficult one. We're weathering this really big storm together. So students are experiencing a loss of routines, milestones, celebrations, activities, in-person connection. And it clearly has resulted in sadness, anger, decreased motivation, isolation for many children. And that's really hard to accept. At the same time, we have also seen tremendous growth in students throughout the past year. When we were getting together to talk about this presentation, we all were able to give examples of increased independence in students, students who we knew were more resilient because of the things that they were going through now. Increased confidence that, we got through COVID, we can get through other things as well. More self-acceptance, more vulnerability with us at times. Students who are struggling now, who hadn't struggled before. We also hear a lot more gratitude for our privileges. And finally, a lot more looking towards the future, a lot more positive mindset about what's upcoming, when the reality of now is sometimes not something to get excited about. So finally, don't miss opportunities to praise this coping and growth during this time. Thank you very much for your attention. We appreciate it.
I have to give you a round of applause. I thought that was just so fabulous. Thank you. Eric, you're up.
Oh, great. Thanks, Merle. Jamie, Amanda, Gina, thank you so much. This was really insightful. I was taking some notes to try to give a quick highlight or summary of kind of key takeaways. There's a ton. You packed things in, so I appreciate that. I think for me, my takeaway as certainly, a colleague of yours in the district, but a parent myself, is that there's so many little quick things that we can do as adults to really make a significant impact in the life of a child, that take literally a few seconds, and so all of the highlights that you brought today really hit home. And when you said them, it's like, yeah, of course. But I think I can speak for myself, I lose sight of that, or you forget about that, how impactful that can be when it's such a small scale thing, right? It's not a significant procedural thing. It's just all about relationships and making sure that child has self-esteem, confidence, and connection. So I really appreciate that aspect that you brought to the table tonight. And certainly, again, my feelings about you three. I really appreciate your knowledge and expertise and your willingness to come tonight. And then just a shout out to everyone else, really that hung around with us tonight and were able to hear really this insightful information. I really believe it's no surprise. I think it's obvious right now, especially in what we're going through as a community, as globally, that connection is even that much more important right now. So thank you all. And Merle, I'll shoot it back to you for Q&A.
Okay, well, thanks. But before we get into that, I just want to echo what Eric just said, to Gina, to Amanda, to Jamie, and to Alex in absentia. This was a wow for me. I mean, I just sat there and I just was listening and taking all kinds of notes on my note cards on every slide. It was interesting because when I first went over the presentation and Jamie had sent me in Drive, and I said to him, I says, there's enough here for 3 or 4 different events, and he immediately shut me up. But it really, the breadth and depth that you covered in such a short time was absolutely awesome. And I wish we'd had time to see that whole video. That's the first thing I'm going to go back and look at, that not yet video. I was so impressed. If people will indulge me, I'd like to start off the Q&A. I have a question.